Trelawney of the Wells is BBC Two's Theatre Night production on Sunday at 8:35. Now, on to Now the War is Over, with A Home of Our Own, which tells how the worst housing crisis of the century leads to prefabs, the first British squatters, and dreams of new cities.
Aftermath of war. In parts of Britain, the bomb damage was devastating. A quarter of the nation's houses had been damaged. Coventry, Merseyside, Birmingham, Plymouth and London had the worst of the bombing. In 1945, there had been no building for 6 years. Even houses begun at the outbreak of war remained unfinished. 3 million children born in the war years added to the housing crisis. The need to repair and build again was immediate. Nothing was to be too good for the returning troops. Politicians promised a home for every family. Expectations were high when Labour was swept to power. But builders were still in the forces. Bricks, cement and timber were scarce. Homecoming soldiers looking forward to family life often had nowhere to live. Even a temporary roof would do. An answer lay in the abandoned army camps up and down the country.
Now a story from Scunthorpe in Lincolnshire, which Movietone presents without prejudice or comment. This is a disused military gun site which has been taken over by people urgently needing somewhere decent to live. I understand there are about 2,000 families at Scunthorpe awaiting homes. Some of these squatters, you might call them, have apparently taken the law into their own hands. A committee has been formed by these people under the chairmanship of the first resident.
My name is James Fielding. I'm a married man with 4 children and came to Scunthorpe on a job of work and spent many weeks of searching, which was fruitless, for accommodation.
Our father had heard about an empty house along this road somewhere, and so we set off with the pram and we all walked from Scunthorpe, along the road from Scunthorpe and up the hill. It was summer's day, it was warm, not unlike today probably. And when there was no sign of the empty house, and we got to the road outside the camp here to the hedge, and we stopped for rest. And parents decided to have a look round the camp.
I found that several of the huts had straw in them, and that evidently sheep had wandered in, or had been put in by neighbouring farmers. And I felt if it was right for animals to be put in, it was much more right that homeless human beings should have them. We take the view that any right-minded men would agree with the action our desperation forced us to take.
2 miles from Scunthorpe, the remains of the Sawcliffe camp are still visible. Returning to the place where they lived for 3 years, Britain's first squatters remember the frustration they felt.
We was promised, oh, you're fighting for your country. You're going to have this when you come out. You're only on small money now, but you're the backbone of England and oh, what we're going to do for you. And what did we do? We came home, we were shoved in rooms, we was pillar to post, nobody wanted us. So when we come on here, it was freedom. We could do as we liked. We had a place each of our own.
Within months, 40,000 people had followed the Fieldings' lead. Hundreds of empty camps were turned into places in which to live and work.
The electricity wasn't very good not having that, especially as I was sewing. Stitching sequins in candlelight wasn't very good because you'd strike at a sequin and flicker of a candle and you'd miss it.
We made the hut nicer by putting lino up and partitioning the bedrooms off. And then we got to know about these packing cases across the aerodrome, so we went across and was helping ourselves with the wood.
We went out to the back door and we was in a corridor that led to the ablutions. So we put a lock on each toilet there. Not that anybody had pinched a bucket full, they'd leave us a bucket full if we didn't lock it up. And we saved our water that we'd used during the day and flushed at night.
They were living like gypsies, and they were looking like gypsies in most eyes. And another thing, they were making a nuisance of themselves by the fact that there was, in the early stages, there was neither water or anything on. And of course, they were going round to the local houses, begging buckets of water and one thing. And in so far as the occupiers at that time, they felt that they were being a damn nuisance.
At least the camps were a place to live. Local councils turned on water and electricity, and the squatters became their tenants. Housing the homeless after the war was one of the worst problems facing the new Labour government. It was a time for instant, if temporary, solutions.
George Smith, who will shortly be demobbed, and Mrs. Smith are looking for a house. That's not very unusual, but these are unusual days, and the usual sort of house is unusually scarce. So what do? They stop, they look, and they glisten. They glisten because they're on the track of a uni-seco house. That is, a house that's made up of sections of portable units. The first thing to do, of course, is to visit the building site. So let's go along with them. Sold again? Oh no, there are plenty more. And if we're not mistaken, that's a complete house on the way. Just a lorry load of love nest.
Houses, and quickly. That's the answer 9 out of 10 people all over Britain give when asked what's number 1 on the country's priority list of wants. Prefabrication, now one of the most overworked words in the language, has been welcomed, not because factory-made houses are ideal or even permanent, but because they are at least houses, and inside them men and women can make homes.
Prefabs were very popular, but there weren't enough to go round.
There was the council people outside with a table. There was 9 families lining up. Of course, Mary's got my hand and said, oh, there's only 8 prefabs. Of course, someone was going to be unlucky. And as number 2 went, then number 3, number 4, so the tension was getting worse. But when it came to the one, number 8, he called my name to the table. I said, yes, we'll have it. He said, but you haven't seen it yet. I said, yes, we have. And I told him, oh, he said, that's all right, sign here for the keys. I think we had to give him 5 shillings for the keys. The council still owes us that 5 shillings. And we took it and we moved in week after. I did feel sorry for the person who was left out, and she even cried. Happiest day ever happened.
And the kitchen has that simple benefit, the table that disappears into the wall. So much easier than washing up. There's a gas stove, unless you prefer electric. And of course a refrigerator where you keep the lager beer. A thermostat switch heats the water when you have no fire. Like it?
For a small house for the men who are coming home and the women who have been working hard in the factories and want to get back to family life, I think it is an ideal house.
Building permanent homes was a top priority, tightly controlled by the Labour government. With little private building allowed, councils had a near monopoly of house building. But they found it very hard to get the houses built.
The first shortage was materials. The difficulty in getting your materials ordered so that they could be built into the system as quickly as possible. Second was labour. And third, I think, was probably the inherent difficulties of being able to manage the thing properly so that you've got a solid flow of houses coming off at the end of your production run.
There was a limit on what could be spent on house repair. Most builders were working on new houses or repairing bomb damage, so do-it-yourself came into its own.
Building materials was very short, as you can well imagine, and consequently, when they was putting up the prefabs in the Ripple Road, there was enough prefab to put about 100 up, and no night watchman about. It was the delight, because you could go along there and take exactly what you wanted. You could take the bathroom taps, you could take the ammonia-type fridges, asbestos, everything that you wanted, that you've seen during the war, but you had never had there, was laying for you just to help yourself, and it was really great. It was one or two times that I noticed that that they had to where they put all the goods, they put a lovely big fencing round it, but to stop some of the stealing, and that lasted about a day, because the next night it was gone, and all in all, everybody was on the nick.
Pilfering became more common, and another post-war phenomenon, the queue, became part of the British way of life.
When the war finished, we was all desperate for houses, and we used to queue up at the Green Lane, Stagnum. When I say queue up, you had to fight your way to the counter, because everybody was really desperate. I mean, they was promised houses, but it never came. So either you knew somebody, a councillor, or you just went there and just fought your way to be first to ask, where's my house?
I used to go queue up at the council offices every Monday morning, and there'd be a queue about a mile long, and all the women grumbling, of course, and everybody trying to get in there. And one particular morning, this lady came out in a fur coat and held up a key. I've got one, she said. I let him lock the door and have what he wanted. So I said, well, if that's the way I'm going to get one, I'll go without.
Well, I only want to say I put my application in 1935, and I'm still waiting for a house. Why? With repeated applications renewed.
So they wait. People in hundreds of thousands, people in shacks and shelters, in blitzed and partly demolished houses in every part of Britain.
One would arrive at the office first thing in the morning to find a queue already formed, waiting for the office to open, and it would go on all day. The job of interviewing people was very distressing, so much so that we would reckon not to allow the interviewer to continue for more than 2 hours on that work at one stretch.
There was no central directive on allocating houses. Each council devised its own system, some fairer than others.
It worked like this: no bathroom, 30 points. Shared bathroom, 15 points. Got a bathroom, nil. That sort of thing. No separate hot water supply, so many points. Shared hot water supply, half that number. Got a water supply, no points. Shared lavatory in the same sort of way. Points for each need. A physical need in the house of what was lacking for decent living conditions.
I've no bathroom in this house, no hot water at all, only what I heat. I have a cold water tap. I have a sink, but of course I have no draining board, and it makes it very awkward when you come to wash the pots. I either have to put them on the sink or on the table to drain, and of course the water drips all over the place. That makes another mess. And the toilet's at the bottom of the garden. That's very awkward sometimes, especially with the children. And there's nowhere for them to play at all.
Sometimes a mother, having got nowhere with the welfare authorities, would come and we would say, well, we can't do anything for you. Not yet, not for some time. You're only just registering, and people have been waiting 7 or 8 years. And they would go and leave the baby in the in-tray and hope that in desperation we would find them somewhere to go.
Well, they told us we'd have to have another 60 points at least before we stood a chance of having a place. And we'd always planned to have 4 children. So I said to Ben, well, let's have another baby. We'll get a house then. So after a lot of persuasion, we decided, and we had another baby. And we got down there, and they said, well, we're very sorry, Mrs. Adams, but about 300 other couples did the same as you that night. And we were back to square one, in a worse position, really, with another baby on the way and, you know, no place to put it.
The war aggravated an already bad housing situation. A start had been made in the 30s on clearing the slums, but many were still living in conditions unaltered for 100 years. In towns all over the country, people were crammed into overcrowded back-to-back terraces with no hot water or bathroom. The need for better housing was strongly argued during the war. It was part of the better world being fought for.
People want to live where there's beauty, where there's privacy and health, yet close enough to work. This can be achieved only by planning our cities, our industries, our countryside as one. Many oppose the controls, the restrictions needed to do it, but there is no other way to avoid the black mistakes of the past.
The battle for planning was accompanied by heavy-handed propaganda against the unrestricted building of pre-war years.
Here's another way in which the country suffers. Ugly and unmannerly advertisement hoardings screaming at the passer-by, and dirty little messes by the side of the road. Do we really want this sort of thing in the country?
From one end of Britain to the other, railways, arterial roads, cars and motor coaches opened the way to the biggest boom in real estate this country has ever known. The promise of a new road sent land values rocketing. There was freedom to build anything, anywhere. A new phrase was born, ribbon building. Houses on the never-never. No government attempted to curb the speculator, the jerry builder, the profiteer. And the cities went sprawling out. It was nobody's business to fix building standards. Nobody's business to plan.
This time, there'd been no mistakes. During the war, preparations were made for building new cities out of the ruins. Architects drew up elaborate plans for Coventry and Plymouth, and for London, the most detailed document of its kind was prepared.
We had to find out everything about this great city we were planning to rebuild. Everything about its history and its geography, its people, and the way they live. We had to find out how much of it had been totally destroyed and how much of it was in such a bad state that it would have to be rebuilt anyway. And that didn't just mean the bombed buildings.
London grew up without any plan or order. That's why there are all those bad and ugly things that we hope to do away with if this plan of ours is carried out.
Professor Patrick Abercrombie had inspired architects in town planning for years. The war gave them an opportunity to carry out their ideas on a large scale. The Abercrombie plan for London designed attractive communities based on the old London villages.
Thousands of maps were made, hundreds of charts drawn, discarded, revised, and done again, until at last we were ready with a complete plan to put before the government and the people of London.
First, let's look at one of the neighborhoods and see how that's arranged. Here, near the center, is the junior school. The people would live in streets or squares of terraced houses, each with its own private garden. So it's not an inhuman plan at all, but one that is designed to make life better and pleasanter for all of us.
And so we started in 1945 with great expectations, with great enthusiasm, to try and build the new London, to make good all the devastation of wartime, to really provide a new London for the people who deserved it, and trying to give them a better kind of environment than they'd ever had before.
Well, I suppose the broadest objective was human welfare. Human welfare in terms of health, so that everybody could be healthy, everybody could have a reasonable diet, everybody could have a reasonable space to live in, that there would be no illnesses consequent on bad housing. So obviously housing was the most important priority.
Percy Johnson Marshall and Arthur Ling began bringing their plans to life in the East End. The King and Queen came to see the first of their Lansbury buildings.
Every facility, of course, is to be provided for the Lansbury people. Those of the younger generation are naturally very interested to see what sort of a school they're going to have.
Harper's new Lansbury neighborhood, which will be a complete little town when ready, welcomes the first tenant, Mr. Albert Snoddy, to its first completed block of flats. To mark the occasion, the chairman of the LCC Housing Committee hands Mr. Snoddy the key to his 4-room ground floor flat. His old home, a stricken survivor of the Blitz, is to be pulled down in the making of another housing estate. Besides her family, Mrs. Snoddy will have her mother staying with her. As the Snoddies leave for their new home, Albert says farewell like a soldier. Albert is a 35-year-old boilermaker, and because he has been lame from birth, it's a ground floor flat they're moving into.
When I first saw a flat, I can't say that I was all that keen on it. I would have preferred to have gone and lived in a house with young children. I felt very sad about leaving the old house. We had a backyard, children could go out and play. We didn't want to leave the old house. We would have preferred to have stayed in it. But we had to get out, we had no alternative. So we had to plumb for the flat.
The aim behind Lansbury was to preserve the East End tradition of squares and terraces, though some low-rise flats were built as space was short. Abercrombie's plan also suggested moving people out of the city centre. 8 entirely new towns will be built in the country, giving people a healthier and better place to live, and the architects an opportunity to put their dreams into practice by building from scratch.
Our town was going to be a good place to work in and a grand place to live in, with plenty of open spaces, parks, and playing fields where people could enjoy them, flower gardens. And of course, there'd have to be an attractive town centre too, with plenty of room for folks to meet, good shops, a posh theatre, cinemas, a concert hall, and a civic centre.
Most important of all is the child. So we'll need pedestrian routes for the pram pusher. Nursery schools within 400 yards of every home.
Detached houses. Semi-detached. Terraced houses. Flats for people who wanted them. Hostels where the young folks could get together. And bungalows for the oldies.
Hemel Hempstead was one of the 8 designated new towns. Londoners were brought by the busload to see what it was all about.
It's funny how one day can change your whole life, and that one certainly did the trick. I was singing away with the boys, but underneath I was thinking what a lot of country there still was untouched, and how lovely it was looking. I was thinking too why it was that with all that space and air, people still had to go on living as I was living. Me, the wife and the children, in 2 rooms in London.
We read it in the paper, in the local paper, that there was a trip out to the new towns. We tried to find it before on our bikes and missed it by going up the wrong road. But so we took the trip on the bus and came out and saw all the houses and then decided this was the place we would very much like to be if we ever had the chance, but we didn't think we would have.
In 1946, the new towns were still in the hands of the planners. The Fords would have to wait for their dream house. That year, only 55,500 houses were built. It was the worst housing crisis the country had known. The minister in charge of housing was Aneurin Bevan.
It's all right to have visits from your mother-in-law, but you don't want to live with her all the time.
Bevan's programme got off to a slow start, but he demanded the highest standards for council housing.
These particular flats can boast of many first-class amenities. The kitchens, as you see, are really well fitted out and should help to make life a lot easier. And to judge from the other rooms in the furnished specimen flat, occupants ought to be extremely comfortable. The number of bedrooms in these flats varies from 1 to 4. There's a central laundry, which is all electric and practically automatic. In addition, good arrangements are being made for garaging that important vehicle, the pram.
He wanted the quality of housing to be very much better than it had been in the old council, in the old council house day. And so he insisted on certain minimum standards, which many at that time thought were probably too good for ordinary working class people. I shall never forget the uproar that occurred when he proposed to put upstairs and downstairs loos in order that the kids didn't have to go upstairs every time they came in from the garden.
Nye Bevan was an idealist. He wanted a free health service for everyone, and his priority in housing was building for those most in need. 4 out of 5 houses were built for local authorities. There was little scope for private building.
If we are to plan, we have to plan with plannable instruments. And the speculative builder, by his very nature, is not a plannable instrument.
Bevan had no time for us at all. In fact, he said it was a military operation. A lot of us would have been shot.
There had to be rationing for buildings, just as there had to be for clothing and food. And before you could put up a building, you had to get a building license. And only then could you apply for town planning permission. In some ways, for us as planners, this was an advantage because it meant that the rush of speculative building, which occurred much later on, was held at bay.
Bevan had continued the principle of wartime controls. Town planners were in sympathy with his policies. Builders complained red tape slowed everything down.
I believe that people can work much better without somebody looking over their shoulder all the time and saying, sorry, you can't do that, and you must fill in these forms before you can do that.
There were other criticisms of Labour's housing policy. There was no Ministry of Housing as such. Bevan was in charge, but was actually Minister of Health. Picture Post, 1946.
10 cooks are spoiling the broth. They are too many in number and get in each other's way. Mr. Dalton, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, is responsible for providing the capital required to pay out the housing subsidies. Mr. Arthur Greenwood, the Lord Privy Seal, has certain vague overruling functions. Mr. Tomlinson, the Minister of Works, directs the building industry. Mr. Isaacs, the Minister of Labour, has to provide manpower. The Minister of Town and Country Planning can decide against house building on any site. The Minister of Agriculture must be consulted about rural housing. The Minister of Supply deals with materials. North of the border, the Secretary of State for Scotland controls housing. The 10th cook is Sir Stafford Cripps, who, as President of the Board of Trade, is now calling upon all builders employing more than 50 men to reply to 90 questions. The issue of these forms will add to the delays and costs of house building.
Bevan's policies were unpopular both with those in need of a house and those with other interests at stake.
I should be very much against the building of any factories or the like in this part of the country. There's plenty of room for them in the right place.
Well, I don't hold with all this talk about planning. Let's see a little real action, and not so much of the hot air and nothing to show for it.
Action was taken at this empty block of flats in Kensington. The Communist Party organised a squat to draw attention to the housing crisis.
We actually had a furniture removal van into which about 30 people were packed. We indicated that a mattress and a simple cooking utensil would be appropriate in the first instance. Other stuff could be brought along later.
At 1 o'clock, we set off with a little attaché case with a...
An alarm clock?
Yes, with an alarm clock and a few bits in, and made our way up.
I went out in the rain, dressed as much as I could to protect myself, came up somewhere up here, I can't quite remember where we met people, and I was absolutely horrified to see, literally, to me, it seemed like hundreds of people coming along. The only way I can really express it is today when we see these documentaries with refugees. An army officer came along, and he said, "Hello, good morning, what are you doing here?" And I said, "We're squatting." Well, of course, nobody knew what the word squatting meant.
One of their immediate problems was evidently quickly solved, the milk supply. And when we visited these people who claimed to be victims of the housing shortage, they'd taken the law into their own hands. The government's attitude had not yet been declared, but Terry Cotter of Movietone had a chat with some of the new residents.
Mr. Coleman, you're the secretary of the Goulburn branch of the Kilburn Communist Party.
That's quite right, yes.
You brought the families here, did you?
Yes, we brought about 40 families from North Kensington.
What sort of accommodation did you have, Mrs. Barnes?
I had one room with 2 families, and we're both married, and Van's husband's in the forces and my husband's at home now, and I was paying £1 a week for it.
4 people in one room?
Yes, sir, for £1 a week.
That seems rather much, doesn't it?
It do, sir.
The communist-inspired squat quickly spread to other flats and hotels in London. Stan Henderson, along with the other leaders, was arrested. There was alarm at the communists' involvement and the escalation of squatting into private property.
Well, it was all right when they were going to army huts or any kind of army billets. And when they started taking private property, well, I think they made a big bloomer.
Wholesale squatting in luxury flats and hotels turns the spotlight on a still desperate housing situation. Labour leaders say lawless acts by squatters can only lead to injustice and anarchy. Now meet the man with a few words to say and the police who took him along for a quiet talk. While the country watches for court decisions on the squatters' future, the whole question flares up to the month's biggest talking point.
We were eventually found guilty, and we were bound over for 2 years. Mr. Stable, the judge, very kindly expressed himself at great length to the point of view that we had not acted from self-interest, but with a desire to help people who were in a particularly dire set of circumstances.
The squatters' water and power were cut off, and they were forced to leave the flats they'd occupied for 12 days.
Well, at that time, the government didn't seem to be doing all it promised to do after the war, of rehousing the people, not only from the forces, but people generally that had been bombed out. And we think that the squatting movement there raised the whole tempo of house building.
Within 2 years of war ending, the housing program finally took off. Builders were back at work, and by 1951, over 1 million houses had been built. The new towns around London were well on their way. Lord Reith was chairman of the Hemel Hempstead New Towns Committee. He was determined that Hemel Hempstead would be the first to be finished. Philip B. took up the challenge.
We used to go round with large cartons of cigarettes, saying to the plasterers and to the bricklayers, look, you get those off by Sunday and there's 20 fags for you, you see. And we get through 150 fags a week sometimes doing this, but we got most houses. Nobody caught us up for a long, long time.
As soon as the house was finished, someone moved in. Ben and Nora Adams were the first new towners in Hemel Hempstead.
All we saw was open fields, 4 or 5 houses, some being completed, tons and tons of cement, ballast and bricks. And
pouring wet.
Pouring rain.
Wasn't a very good impression, really,
Well,
the first impression we had
but
on it.
we liked the house very much.
Well, we came in and we had a look at the house, and I said to Rick, you know, sort of got all excited because it was the type of house we wanted. We'd always said we'd wanted. When I went upstairs to explore, there was 1 bedroom and another bedroom and a bathroom and an airing cupboard and another door down the end. Wonder what that is. So I went and had a look, and I had 3 bedrooms, which made me come downstairs, sit on the bottom step and howl. I wept, simply because I was so happy. We had a garden for the child to run in. Well, a garden of sorts, of course, because by then it was only rubble. It was, they'd taken off the topsoil and left us a beautiful layer of yellow clay, which walked into the house everywhere. But nevertheless, we had a house, a home of our own, where we could shut the front door and we didn't have to worry about anybody.
Well, the general reaction was that they liked it. They were lovely, except for one gentleman from the old Kent Road, who I've never forgotten, who said one day, he came in and he said, I'm going back to London. He said, I can't stand the noise of these bloody dicky birdies.
There was no organised entertainment at all, except the 2 cinemas down in the town. And so we had to make our own. So we used to get together in groups, and we used to have, once a week, all the families, all the parents would come into one house, and we would have a game of housey or something. And we would have a sort of social evening of our own. We all used to take turns.
The Adams and the Fords were pioneers of the new towns. Their way of life has been just as the town planners hoped it would be. In other parts of the country, people also moved into good quality houses. But there was always pressure to build more and faster.
One of the major dilemmas over housing in those first few years, when you could only build limited number, was should you build 250,000 houses of a higher quality or 300,000 of a slightly lower quality. I felt at the time that Bevan was a bit too keen on the high quality at the expense of the quantity. But it was a period when the shortage was so great and so many people were so badly housed in, you know, wartime bomb property or low standard pre-war property. And the fewer houses you built, of course, the longer you had to wait. On the other hand, it was nicer for those who went into new houses to have an upstairs lavatory as well as a downstairs lavatory or a ceiling 1 foot higher. And Bevan was a man who always cared about quality rather than quantity, and I think this affected his judgment.
Either we muddle along as we've done in the past, or you'll have to be patient and risk hardship and discomfort for a time until you can have something worth waiting for. Well designed and in happy surroundings. We are all to blame for what we have allowed to happen in the past. We shall deserve all we shall get if we do not make the best use this time of the opportunity we now have to improve our living conditions. It may be our last chance to plan for the future.
In 1951, the Conservatives took over.
This then is our housing message. The quicker you build, the more you will be able to build, and the more you will be asked to build. And this goes for local authorities and private enterprise alike. There will be more for everybody. More houses to let and more houses to sell.
The argument that it was better to wait and build well was lost. Houses became numbers in a political battle to see who could build most during the 1950s and 60s. As soon as a site became available, it was built on. Buildings grew higher to increase the number of homes that could be crammed into one place. At Lansbury, the ideas of Arthur Ling and Percy Johnson Marshall were abandoned.
But don't you think that it's a great pity that since 1951 to the present time, a period of about 30 years, all the politicians, and supported by the architects and engineers and others, they've been thinking in terms of how many houses, how many dwellings can we get built, and not how many neighborhoods, how many little groups, human groups. And if you look along this road here, you can see these tall blocks soaring into the sky. That's a relatively small one. That's about 20 stories, but there's an even larger one along the road, and over the other side there, they're grouped in great clusters. And everybody complains now that this isn't the way they want to live. It's the old Lansbury estate that they like, the small houses, the small groups of buildings.
In the shadow of Westminster lies a street of prefabs. They survived longer than anyone forecast. They were built to last 10 years. Joe Linsell is still there.
This is one of my bedrooms, as you can see, not a bit of damp, and never seen a drop of rain or anything wet. Now I'll show you my bathroom. Oh, by the way, there's the other bedroom. This is the first time I've ever had a bathroom. Come in here twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week, have a nice bath. I don't want nothing else.
Rena Lester has had a variety of council houses since she left the Scunthorpe camp.
The nicest place I ever had was a little prefab. Oh, it was gorgeous. You had a nice little garden. Oh, and birds of a morning. It was beautiful. You'd have your windows open and it was really nice. I loved it.
Next week, fun after the war. Football and cricket, jazz and ballroom dancing. The pictures and musicals have never been more popular, and with little in the shops, there's plenty of money to spend living it up. And by the way, there's a BBC book based on the